Hello, BookTube. Today I'm going to be giving you my review of On Her Majesty's Secret Service by Ian Fleming, which was published in 1963 and is the 11th of the original James Bond books. I've read this as a general reread I'm doing of those books, which consist of 12 novels and 2 collections of short stories. On Her Majesty's Secret Service begins with James Bond returning from an unsuccessful mission in Italy. He has spent the past year searching for Blofelds and the remains of Spectre, and at this point, Bond is convinced it's nothing more than a wild goose chase. This view has been reinforced by the unsuccessful mission in Italy, where he is sent to search for a man to take a look at a man who was suspected to be Blofeld, but he's in fact an entirely respectable German gentleman involved in the wine industry. Bond is travelling back from Italy to England and has decided to stop in at Real Lizzo, the location of Casino Royale. Which he visits every year to visit the grave of Vesper Lind. On his way there, he gets into a small race with a extremely attractive young woman driving a white Lancia, and she immediately gets Bond's attention by the fact that she drives the car well and is clearly something of a racer. And this sort of sets Bond's mind to finding out who she is if she's at Royale. When Bond does get to Royale, he goes into this Hotel Splendide, which is where he stayed in Casino Royale, and finds out that the young woman is called Countess Teresa di Vicenza, and she is actually staying there. And Bond decides he's going to try and get to know her. He has something to eat and then goes that evening to the casino where he plays cards. He's quite successful, and then the young woman arrives and bets and loses, but she has no money, and so she's in peril of being blacklisted from not just the Casino Royale, but most of the casinos in Europe. And Bond decides to intervene and puts up the money, pretending that he was a gambling partner with her, but he forgot to tell the table that he was going to be gambling. This sort of saves her from disgrace. And so after the card game, Bond and Teresa start talking, and she tells him that she prefers the name Tracy. They have a conversation where she tells a bit about her background, a bit about herself, and it becomes clear to Bond that she's not well, and the way that she was talking and thinking about the way she was driving, there's a possibility she might be thinking of taking her own life, and so Bond is somewhat worried about her and becomes sort of protective of her. They sleep together, and then the next day Bond decides to watch over her, and he waits for her to leave the hotel, and then he follows her to the beach where she goes sunbathing. And then at the end of the day, she goes to walk out to sea, and Bond is convinced she's going to try and drown herself, and so he goes up to her. At this point, 2 men approach them and take them prisoner and put them aboard a boat which goes down the coast to the mouth of the river Somme, because Royale is on the coast near the mouth of Somme, and they are taken to an articulated lorry where the wagon thing on the back is being converted into effectively a mobile office and home. Tracy is taken to a room, and then Bond is introduced to the owner of this articulated lorry, Mark Ange Draco, who, as well as being Tracy's father, is also the head of the Corsican mafia known as the Union Corse. Mark Ange explains to Bond that he had received a letter from Tracy the previous night, telling him that she was going to end it all, but mentioning that Bond had been kind to her and that he had made her feel somewhat better. And so Mark Ange proposes that Bond should marry Tracy, and he will pay him £1 million. Bond sort of refuses, partly because the idea of getting married sort of repels him, but also he understands that that's not going to help Tracy. She needs professional help, and he tells Mark Ange this, who is somewhat saddened by Bond's sort of refusal, but accepts the sense of what he's saying. And so Mark Ange agrees, but does ask Bond if he can do anything to help him. And so Bond asks him to have a look if he knows anything about Blofeld. As it happens, Mark Ange does know something about Blofeld, because not too long before their meeting, a couple of Corsican men who are members of the Union Corse defected to Blofeld's side. And so Mark Ange uses his connections and calls up his people and finds out that Blofeld is somewhere in Switzerland but doesn't know anything more. Bond says thank you, and then he agrees to take Tracy out to dinner that night. Bond does. They sleep together. Tracy is clearly somewhat better off, and she agrees to go to Switzerland, and also Bond agrees to meet her around Christmas time in Switzerland. Then the story moves forward a couple of months. Bond is back in London, and he's sent to the College of Arms, where the heraldry is done for coat of arms, that sort of thing. The reason Bond's sent there is because the College of Arms has received a letter from somebody called Blofeld asking to confirm his confirm that he's descended from the Counts of de Blouville in France, so that he can be officially recognised in France. Bond and then the people at the Royal College of Arms discuss Blofeld's the possibility of Blofeld being descended from them, and they make the point that, and Bond asks if there's any way that he could get a face-to-face meeting could be got with Blofeld, and the man at the College of Arms called Sable Basilisk says that there is one way that like what a lot of royal and aristocratic families, the de Bluevilles have a distinctive physical feature that is passed down, which is hereditary, which is that their ears don't have earlobes. And so Bond and Sable Basilisk come up with the idea that Bond, under the cover of a Scottish baronet called Sir Hilary Bray, a real person they use identity, he sort of agrees to it. The Bond should use this cover and go to this Blofeld's place in Switzerland, and then Bond can see if he can identify if this is the actual Blofeld that Bond's after, and then Bond can come up with some way to get him out of Switzerland and get MI6 to capture him. M is a bit not very convinced by this, but he doesn't see any other option. There's no other leads on Blofeld, so he sends Bond off to Switzerland. Bond gets to Switzerland, and he is met by this Blofeld's. He is referred to as the Count de Blouville throughout the book by officials there, by sort of the people at at his place. He's met by the Count's right-hand woman, Emma Bunt, a sort of physically and personally unpleasant individual. Bond then gets taken up to the Count's lair, the Piz Gloria, at the top of a mountain. It's a ski resort with a bobsled course, and which sort of pays for itself whilst the Count has a laboratory where he's doing unspecified experiments, and he has 10 patients there, all of whom are extremely attractive British girls, and 9 British girls and 1 Irish girl. All these girls, Bond discovers through the course of his stay there, have allergies to various forms of livestock, so cattle, poultry, pigs, and so on. And Bond, during his stay there, sort of can't understand what's going on with these treatments, because as far as you can tell, there isn't anything sinister about it. These girls have these allergies and sort of instinctive dislikes of these animals, and the treatment that the Count is giving them is working perfectly. There's one girl who's sort of Bond's main contact among the girls, called Ruby, who's from Lancashire, and she has, I think it's chicken. She has an allergy to chicken, and now she loves chicken and eats it all the time. Emma Bunt, whilst Bond is getting to know the girls, he keeps getting interrupted by Emma Bunt, who tells them that who tells the girls they can't give Bond their surnames because that would somehow interrupt the treatment. And also, Bond's room doesn't have a handle inside, so to leave it, he has to press a button to let him go in and out. This again is something that is referred to as a part of the treatment. Bond, on his second day there, he's woken up by a death scream and learns that one of the men working at the place has died falling down the bobsled course. Overhearing the girls talk, it becomes clear that the reason why the man was in fact killed and didn't really fall, and the reason for that is that he had attempted to try something on with one of the girls. This sort of makes Bond think that this Blofeld might be Blofeld because it's typical of his sort of ruthless attitude towards disobeying orders. Then, after breakfast, Bond goes and has a meeting with the Count, and Bond is initially put off by the man's appearance because he looks nothing like Blofeld. However, his suspicions he isn't completely put out because whilst physically he looks different, the one thing that would identify Blofeld, which is his eyes, which are very distinctive. The Count has his eyes covered up with tinted contact lenses. The Count claims this is because of the ultraviolet light from being so high up in the mountains, but Bond is suspicious. Over the course of Bond goes there on the 22nd of December, and then on the 24th, Bond has another meeting with the Count, but this is interrupted by the arrival of the Count's men with a man who has been following one of Blofeld's men. Bond immediately recognises him as a man called Sean Campbell, who is the number 2 at the MI6 station in Zurich, and who knows Bond personally. And sort of Campbell, who's been very heavily beaten up and disorientated, sees Bond and asks him for help, saying the name James. Bond, however, sort of has to deny Campbell's knowing Campbell, and but he knows that he's only got a amount of time before he can escape. In the meantime, Bond, over the course of the rest of the day, gets the names of the girls, their surnames, their full names, and where they come from, and then he makes at night a daring escape down the mountain. He initially goes down, down on skis. He's chased by Blofeld's men. There is just to explain the way to get up to Piz Gloria. Bond's taken up there by helicopter, but there's also a cable car, and as Bond is going down from the mountain, skiing down from the mountain to the bottom, the cable car comes down and men are throwing grenades from there, which are throwing grenades from the cable car towards Bond, and also is being shot at. Bond does, however, make his escape and then gets to a village where obviously there's Christmas Eve celebrations, and Bond hides among the celebrations at a ice rink. Whilst he's there, he runs into Tracy. Tracy tells him that Bond had informed Mark Ange that he would be in Switzerland, but not to contact him because he was undercover. And Tracy and so Mark Ange had told Tracy this, and she had decided that while she wasn't going to contact Bond, she was going to go up and try and find him just so she could see him physically. And she was the following day going to visit Piz Gloria. This enables Bond to get away from Blofeld's men who are following them. They are traced by a group of Blofeld's men in a car. Fortunately, they're able to get rid of them by they reach an area of road where a temporary road has been made because there's a bridge across a ravine that's broken. Bond is able to the bridge is sort of fenced off, and there's a arrow pointing to the temporary road. Bond pulls down the fence, turns the arrow pointing towards the broken bridge, and this sends Blofeld's men down there and to their deaths, and then he sort things back out so nobody else will follow that route. After that, Bond is taken by Tracy to Zurich, where he buys a ticket to London and has breakfast. Before he goes, he at that point sort of fallen in love with Tracy. Over the sort of months since he met her, his feelings developed for her, and he's now got to the stage that he truly is in love with her, and he proposes marriage, which she accepts. He then sends her to Munich for safety, and he informs London of what's going on, and then travels back to London. In London, he meets with M and the head of the MI6's head of scientific branch called Leathers, and a man from the Ministry of Fish and Agriculture. And Bond sort of explains everything going on, and he also explains that when he was when he met with Blofeld, Bond doing those interviews, Bond Blofeld was not living in the sort of main area where the girls were, or where Emma Bond and Bond were living. He was in his personal quarters were in the laboratory where his treatments were going on. And on one occasion, Bond looked into one of these laboratories and found it was under a red light, and there were loads of sort of buns. There were vials of stuff of liquid in there, and this combined with the sort of treatment that Bond oversaw being done, the hypnotism of the girls, which is how he's sort of overcoming their allergies, combined with the locations of the girls. It becomes apparent to the man from Egg and Fish what's going on. He points out that all the girls come from important areas of agricultural significance in terms of livestock across the UK and the Republic of Ireland. So you've got Ruby, obviously, is involved with chickens. There was a girl called Polly Tasker who was there the month before Bond arrived, who was from East Anglia and heavily involved in turkeys. And her arrival back coincided with an outbreak of fowl pest in among turkeys, which is killed by the point that Bond's talking with the man from Egg and Fish has killed millions. And so the man from Egg and Fish has worked out that what Blofeld's doing is he's hypnotising the girls, giving them various sort of virulent strains of bacterial diseases, which they're going to spray out on these livestock at big sort of agricultural shows, and it's going to decimate the British economy. Now, what then happens is M sort of gets everybody sort of to action stations. The police have sort of got involved. Ronnie Valance from Special Branches got involved. The girls' names and locations, as well as those, are passed on to him, and they're to be picked up when they come back in the country, as is the one Irish girl who comes from Shannon. And sort of they then at which point Leathers and the man from Egg and Fish leave, and Em and Bond think about what they can do about Blofeld and Pisgloria. Bond then proposes that he be given 2 weeks' leave, where he can, one, get married to Tracy, but also he can use Mark Ange and the Union course to go into Switzerland and kidnap Blofeld. M says that he can't officially sanction this, but he does agree on the 2 weeks' leave and tells Bond good luck. Bond then goes down to Marseille, meets with Mark Ange, and Bond asks for a wedding present, which is the help to pick up Blofeld. Mark Ange agrees, and they do carry out the operation. They are able to get into Switzerland using a helicopter under the cover of a fictional police force called the Federal Mount Alpine Police. They get to Pisgloria. This cover works initially to allow them to land, but then Blofeld's going to work out what's going on. They start opening fire. Then Blofeld travels down the bobsled course, and Bond follows him. Bond initially is catching up with him and is shooting at him, but then Blofeld throws a grenade at him, knocking him off, and Blofeld escapes, though Bond then gets back down to the bottom of the bobsled course, at which point there's a huge explosion at Pisgloria, which Bond initially thinks might have killed Mark Ange and the Corsicans, but then he sees the helicopter going away, and then the Swiss authorities turn up. Bond pretends to be a British tourist who was merely caught up in the blast, because when the explosion took place, it destroyed the cable car station at the top, and it's called the wires come down, and Bond pretended he was hit by the wires, given a glance in the boat, and has been sort of injured by that. He was walking back along the road on his way to Zurich, on the way to a train to catch to Zurich. Bond then gets taken to Zurich, where he goes to the head of station. He informs M of everything over sort of signals, and then catches the flight to Munich, where he spends a day getting ready for the wedding with Tracy and Mark Ange, and then the following day he and Tracy get married. They then decide to go and have their honeymoon in Austria, and they drive down there. Whilst they're driving down there, they notice a red Maserati is on the same road, but they just think nothing of it. They think they must be just German tourists. However, the Maserati after a while catches up with them, and then somebody in the Maserati open fires on their car, and just before Lancia, Tracy's car, crashes, Bond sees Blofeld as the driver, and sorry about that. And then Bond passes out during the crash, and he wakes up to see a young policeman looking over them, and he sees that Tracy is dead, but he can't quite accept it, and he sort of ends the book saying, "We've got all the time in the world," sort of cradling Tracy's head, gently stroking Tracy's hair. Again, as with all the Bond books I've read that are in this reread, really enjoyed it. As with quite a lot of the books, starting with From Russia with Love, Fleming tried something different here. This one, you get the interesting fact that Bond is sort of bored of his service life. Though interestingly, not bored because he is disaffected by the service, but he's bored because he doesn't feel like the service is using his skills fully. At the beginning of the book, where Bond gets into that race with Tracy at the beginning, just before that, Bond is mentally drafting his resignation letter. In that, he points out that he's always found work for the service great, but in the last year following Blofeld, he's just been sort of boredom, and he's found himself being used. His skills aren't being used to the full. Of course, there's the discovery of Blofeld and Mark Ange changes that. The action, as ever, is really good. The race between Tracy and Bond at the beginning is great. The opening, the part where Bond and Tracy are approached by the two men is really well done. You have no idea what those two men are or who they are, but you seem to know that Tracy isn't concerned by them, but you don't know whether that's because of her state of mind or because she actually knows who they are. The interesting change of Bond from the very beginning, where he sort of repels at the idea of marrying Tracy, to the very end where he does it, where he just comes out with it, is nice. There's a certain amount of vulnerability to Bond, which has always been there in these books, but is far more on display than it was before. In previous books, say at the end of Moonraker, or in the beginning of From Russia with Love, really, where Bond is dealing with a girl who he genuinely falls in love with. So in the case of Moonraker, that would be Gala Brand, and in Diamonds Are Forever, from the beginning of From Russia with Love, Tiffany Case, you have the fact that he falls in love with them, but then he's turned down, either in the case of Gala Brand because she's already engaged, or in the case of Tiffany Case, that the sort of relationship sort of goes sour and she goes off with an American. But in this one, you get this sort of vulnerability and him genuinely falling in love with her, and almost from the beginning, where he's got a real sense of protectiveness towards her, which is really well done. Tracy as a Bond girl is great. She's not. I've said this repeatedly now through my reviews. The Bond girls are not in Fleming's books, even the ones that are not very well done. Which there are very few of those that are not well done, solid, or I should say, who are weak in terms of sort of the character. It's in terms of the characterisation, which as I say, are very few. The notable one I can think of is Solitaire in Live and Let Die. Are not merely things to look good on Bond's arm and sleep with him. They have a bite to them. They have they're equal partners with Bond in a way. That they're somebody who he can bounce off, and they bounce off him equally. And Tracy is definitely that. Very much. You see that almost immediately with the car chase, where she, as I said in the summary, she's extremely good and extremely skilled driver, which Bond immediately recognises and is immediately admirable of. Immediately admires that, The end really has a strong emotional punch to it. It comes out of nowhere to a degree. You get a sense that something's going to happen at the end of the book, but the sort of sudden violent death, Tracy's sudden violent switch of Tracy dying, it really does work, and it really does hit you. Now, when it comes to the other action in the book, that's great. I mean, the escape scene from Piz Gloria is Bond's initial escape is really well done, really action packed. He has to outrun an avalanche, which is excellent. The fight on Piz Gloria to try and capture Blofeld is great. You get the real sense of sort of danger and sort of extreme speed that you get with bobsled scenes going down that course, and overall, as ever with Fleming, the action is really good, really taut. The card game in here, again, like with Casino Royale and like with Moonraker, is really well done. You really get the sense of action. I mean, I've said this before, particularly in Casino Royale, that when I initially read the Bond books when I was a kid, I found those scenes with the card games being quite boring. But in the past couple of times I've reread these books, particularly this time, I found those scenes are absolutely full of tension, and the relatively small, short scene of gambling in this is really well done. It has that same real tension. I just want to discuss a few of these historical references through this, because there are quite a few of note that if you don't know much about the period you won't get, but if you do, they're quite interesting. For example, there's one reference to when Bond and Emma are talking about picking up Blofeld, they mention Eichmann being picked up by the Israelis in Argentina, and that idea that they're going to kidnap him, and that's one of the ideas that Bond puts forward to being a solution to getting Blofeld. Another interesting sort of reference was to the fact of the Union Corps' power in France, because many people will know from sort of pop culture that the Sicilian Mafia have immense power in Italy, alongside quite a lot of other organised crime. So the Camorra is another one, but the Union Corps have significant power in France, particularly in the south coast around Marseille. To the extent that in the 1950s and during the Second World War, the Union Corps worked with the French government in dealing with the Germans during the Second World War. Also, they worked with Vichy as well. And in the 50s, they worked in sort of breaking the hold of the communists on the French docks, in particularly Marseille, but in the other ports. And it's interesting that that's mentioned. I'm not sure how well known that is. I think it must be more well known now, particularly given the involvement of the Union Corps in the drug trade to the United States, which is probably most famously sort of shown in pop culture in the French Connection. But I do wonder how well it was known at the time when Fleming wrote. He, being a journalist, would obviously have known that sort of thing, but I'm not sure how much that general sort of reading public would have known. There's another reference here, again with France, with the pilot, pilot and the helicopter that they used to do the attack on Piz Gloria is from the OAS, which is the Organisation Armée Secrète. They were a right-wing, many of them ex-army officers, ex-soldiers in the French armed forces, who were absolutely opposed to sort of giving Algeria independence. They attempted to assassinate de Gaulle. If you've ever seen the film adaptation or read the book of Day of the Jackal, that's the organisation that hires the Jackal to kill de Gaulle. And so it's an interesting reference to them in this book, because of course this was at the height of their sort of reign of terrorism through France. So it's I've got to say I've read quite a few thrillers from this time, some of which are set in France. They don't always mention the RAF, so it's interesting that Fleming does, especially given it was a big thing at the time. They literally had troops on the streets. They were carrying out quite a few attempts on de Gaulle. There were all sorts of things going on at the time. If you're ever interested, I would recommend reading up on it if you're interested, because it's a fascinating story of what the RAF did, and also how de Gaulle's intelligence services sort of really destroy them. There is one reference here which I do find slightly it's an inaccuracy, where the helicopter is being hit on the estate of an OAS supporter who is described as a fascist count. Now, the OAS, one of the common sort of myths about the OAS is that they were effectively leftover Vichy supporters, which isn't true. The vast majority of them were, in fact, men who had either been in the Free French forces during the Second World War, or were from people, or were men whose families supported the Free French. And so Fleming, so it does seem that Fleming sort of in that is sort of regurgitating the sort of goalless line about the OAS as sort of the continuation of Pétain and the Vichy regime by in another form. One other element I should just mention in this, which is the humour. There are sort of elements of humour through the Bond books, not as much as in the Bond film, but they definitely are in Bond films. But they definitely are there in the books. I mentioned in my review of Thunderball that the opening chapter is very, very funny. Of Bond, where Bond is sent down to shrubland, is absolute horror at the idea of being sent there, and sort of M sort of real enthusiasm for the place. And in this book, you actually get two extremely funny scenes. One is where Bond initially goes to the College of Arms, and before he gets to meet Sable Basilisk, he meets a man called Griffin Orr. And Griffin Orr, Bond speaks to him to try and get to Sable Basilisk, but Griffin Orr, Bond can't get a word in edgeways because Griffin Orr is extremely interested in interrogating Bond about his ancestry, and is convinced that Bond is a descendant or is somehow related to the Baronet Sir Thomas Bond, after whom Bond Street in London is named. And then he gets very sort of disgruntled and absolutely shocked that Bond isn't interested in finding out whether he is in some way connected to the Bond of Bond Street, which is very funny. And there's another scene when Bond and the others are flying in the helicopter to take part in the attack on Piz Gloria. The pilot has an extremely funny exchange with two different sort of air traffic controllers, and he sort of goes on this extremely sort of funny attack on them. Particularly one where the cover is the Red Cross, and when the Swiss air controller sort of onto them, saying who is else with you, and the pilot says that it's full of journalists, and do you really want to go down in the papers the next day as interrupting a life and death mission? And he also sort of ends this back and forth with the Swiss air traffic control by saying, I want it put down in records that I am not the Soviet Air Force invading Switzerland. It's very funnily done. And so it does seem that Fleming, over the course of the books, there's always been humour there. It's very dry, but in some of the later books, so pretty much starting with Thunderball, you get scenes, in some cases, in the case of Thunderball, the first chapter, which is extremely funny. And so it's really, you really do see that humour there. It's interesting with Blofeld and the book that he has a weakness. In Thunderball, when you see Blofeld, he's seen as being this supreme genius with no weakness at all. He is absolutely at the top of his game, and here we see him in decline. There's possibly even and that he has a weakness of snobbery. Sable Basilisk points it out that snobbery is something that seems to be a weakness a lot of people have. The idea of being connected to some title or some famous person really does pull to something within them, and Blofeld has this weakness. There's also a suggestion of maybe this snobbery and this need to have some connection with an aristocratic title might be a suggestion of mental imbalance on Blofeld's part, because Bond describes that he has a sore on his nostril, which looks like the signs of tertiary syphilis, and one of the side effects of tertiary syphilis is mental imbalance. So there may be, you get a suggestion, it's never actually stated outright, but you just got the suggestion of, by the mention of the tertiary syphilis, that there may be something, the Blofeld may be going insane. But also Blofeld is a great villain. He was in Thunderball, and he's in this. You get to see sort of the weaker, more vulnerable side of him, sort of of him being sort of extremely, being obviously a genius, the way he's treating the girls, but also having that weakness of the snobbering. There's also a suggestion that Blofeld is working with the Russians, and one of the reason why that Sean Campbell got captured was because one of the men who worked for Blofeld is Russian, and also it seems that the Soviets have actually got a man there who's referred to as Captain Boris, who Bond doesn't meet, but this is somebody who the MI6 in Zurich seem to be interested in as well. And so you've got the suggestion that Blofeld is rebuilding Spectre with Soviet help, which is an interesting thing. That does Captain Boris does reappear in a future in the last book. Interestingly enough, and I've just remembered that, so it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of that plays out. So, but as I say, overall, really enjoyed it. Great novel. Actually, before I go, we'll just say something about the film adaptation of this, which I think is the film adaptation of On Her Majesty's Secret Service is one of the best Bond films. It's also one of the most faithfully adaptation of a Bond book. The film is extraordinarily faithful to the degree that there are very, very few changes to the plot of the book. Almost everything that's in the book is in the film, and all the different, not all the differences, but say 99% of the differences between the book and the film are things that are added to the film that add to the plot of the book, which is very unusual, especially with Bond films. Well, not just Bond films, but with film adaptations on the whole. If you've not seen it, it's worth a watch. And if you like the film adaptation, that really is a good suggestion. You really will like the book as well. And George Lazenby in the film is able to get over the vulnerability I mentioned about Bond and his sort of resistance to marriage, and then eventually coming over it. And also, he really does get the sort of vulnerability and the horror and the shock that Bond feels at the end when Tracy is killed. But I won't say any more. I should say that I'm going to. Some of you will know from my videos, I'm currently having a difficulty with my internet provider. My new one is having difficulty connecting up the internet, so I haven't had my broadband up and running. But hopefully, this week, I should say, I'm recording this on Saturday, and I should have this up on Tuesday. This will be the last Tuesday in May. And by that time I should hopefully have the internet up and running by then, and then I will do a live stream, and in that live stream I think I will just cover a certain amount of I think I'm just going to cover from Russia with Love to Thunderball, and then I'll have another live stream covering the final books, including this one. And in that, I will actually discuss more of the film adaptations. I think I'll discuss the faithfulness of them, and why I think that was done. Well, why I know that was done, and why I think some of one of my sort of dislikes of particularly Moonraker. Also, I am going to have a live stream at some point, probably sometime in June, about sort of, it's going to be adjacent to Bond. It'll be after I will have finished the reread of sort of the sort of primordial ancestors of Bond. So this will be Richard Hannay by John Buchan, Bulldog Drummond by Sapper, Gregory Salas by Dennis Wheatley, and to an extent Sir Dennis Nayland Smith from the Saxroma books, from Fu Manchu by Saxroma. So it's discussing that and discussing more broadly the clubland hero sort of imperial pulp fiction that would influence Bond, and also some of the other British spy fiction of the era. So that'll be something else. I've got somebody lined up to do that, but I won't say anymore just because I'm not sure when we're going to be able to do it. But anyway, with that, BookTube, I will say goodbye, and I will see you very soon.